Today is Friday, September 26th, 2025, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson. I'm here with podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace Smith. Mr. Smith, fall holy days are coming up. Where should our mind and our attention be going?
They are, and they should be going in particular directions, to be sure. It's, I was about to say it's kind of rough doing that here because we're so busy with the holy days, but I wouldn't say that, actually. Our busyness is very much involved with the holy days. It's one nice blessing of working for the work, and even when you're busy, it's busy on holy day related matters. So.
The first thing I noted about, I think I probably mentioned this before, but coming to work at headquarters was at my old civilian job, as it were. You know, I know the feast is coming up, so I'm really working and scrambling to get everything done into everybody else's inbox. But when you work for headquarters, everybody's doing the same thing. Getting ready to go to the feast, getting everything out of their inbox into somebody else's inbox, and so.
That's right. Yeah, so it's been busy times, but hopefully we have our heads on straight. And in particular, what is the next one for us as we record this here on a Friday? The next holy day, we had trumpets earlier this week. I know I had a wonderful trumpets, Mr. Robinson. I hope you did too. And we have the Day of Atonement coming up. And with the Day of Atonement, we tend to actually, of all things, I hope this doesn't sound too weird for those to whom it is new. It should make more sense in a moment. But we actually tend to think about Satan just a little bit more because there's an aspect of the holy day that depicts him. And so what I thought for the podcast today that we might talk about is, with apologies to Julie Andrews, some of Satan's favorite things. Welcome back, and welcome to the podcast. It's very nice to have you here. So, why think about Satan, oddly enough? Because we don't tend to focus on him a whole lot. If anything, the devil wants you to focus on him, right? So we actually don't. But the Day of Atonement pictures, and for those who are not familiar with the holy days of God, please get our free booklet on the holy days, God's master plan. But if you look at the sequence of prophetic events that are pointed to by the holy days, by the festivals of the Bible, the Day of Atonement, which takes place between the Feast of Trumpets and the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Trumpets picturing the year of the Lord, culminating in Christ's return, and the Feast of Tabernacles picturing the millennial reign of Christ and the saints. In between that, festival-wise, you have the Day of Atonement. Well, in between those events, you have this amazing event pictured in Revelation 20, in which the devil is bound and put away for 1,000 years. And without going into the details of this podcast, because it's not the purpose of the podcast, that putting away of the devil is actually pictured in the ancient things that Israel did, the ancient ceremonies. In fact, that's very likely going to be the topic of my sermon here in Charlotte on the Day of Atonement. And so we do tend to think about that because the millennium is going to be founded on many elements, among them the lack of the devil, the devil not being present amongst mankind. And so it does bear thinking about. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11, the context there being he was talking about reaffirming a brother that had been disfellowshipped from the congregation. He'd been sent out because he'd been, committed to his sins, but he has repented of those, bringing him back into fellowship. And he wants them to get about doing that. And he says in verse 11, breaking into the middle of his, actually for Paul, short sentence, I shouldn't be picking on him. He says in 2 Corinthians 2 and verse 11, lest Satan should take advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. It does behoove us, longtime listeners know I like the word behoove. It does behoove us to know what Satan's devices are. Paul kind of assumes his listeners are aware that the devil has very common traps, very common things, very common snares that in which he tries to grab us and to lure us away.
Before we move into Satan's devices, his favorite little things to do to get us, I might mention, because I think it can be all too easy to think about atonement as kind of really focused on Satan, like it's kind of a holy day,
right,
where Satan takes center stage. Now, obviously, he's a major factor in this because it's Satan's been deceiving the whole world. He's been, getting us with these various things that we're going to go into. But also, sometimes forgotten is when the Jubilee is declared, it is declared on atonement. there's a trumpet that's blown on Atonement, and it's to announce the Jubilee and everything that comes with it. So that's freedom to the prisoners in the if he's like the satanic jailer, dungeon master, keeping everybody enslaved.
Mankind set free.
Yep. And then other things that we don't think about so much, but the land, it announces a land rest, a return of the property to the owners, all kinds of things. So there's some very positive things that happen on Atonement. But first, the great slave master must be removed. And he will be. So you take it to the bank.
That's right. So talking about what is it? What are some of his favorite traps? His favorite snares. What are the favorite things that he likes to get us caught up on, so that we are aware of his devices? In no particular order. The first one that came to mind, mainly because it's so natural to him, because it's so intimately connected with him, I think, is pride. Pride. It was actually, I think, described in the Bible as the snare in which he himself got caught up in.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, what passage? Let's see. I got it written here, 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 6. Now, in 1 Timothy 3, Paul is warning Timothy about ordaining someone to an office too quickly while they're still a novice, when they haven't really, they haven't earned their stripes. They haven't actually, put the work in, which humbles you when you do that kind of thing. And so he tells them, in terms of ordaining, verse 6, he says, "Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil." So that is kind of a sense that, the devil himself, part of pride was actually a part of his fall. And I would say it's reflected in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 and those classic passages about the devil.
Well, a lot of things, other sins start out as an element of pride in one way or another. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. In 1 John chapter 2 and verse 6, I know Mr. John Agwin, a pastor to both Mr. Robinson and myself, used to highlight 1 John chapter 2 and verse 16 in terms of its sort of characterization of the different faults here in this world, the different categories of things we can become attached to that we shouldn't be attached to. And it says in 1 John 2 and verse 16, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world." And the pride of life is kind of what we're talking about here in this case. And I always liked how he did, and others have as well. He wasn't alone in this, but related it to the things that were said to Eve, about the fruit, on the tree, how she saw, that it was, it's good fruit, it's good for food, and it's, desirable to make one wise. I thought it was really interesting how her description, in her mind, fits those categories. But what I want to highlight about 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 6, where we started, it talks about being lifted up with pride. And it's interesting. All of that is actually generally one Greek phrase. The word there actually is. It's not this negative sense of pride. It's not just a matter of being, let's say you're a Ms. Robinson. You have skills. I know I have very few skills. You work with. What do you do? What's you work with? What, you build a good fire. You're a good fire builder. I know that, right? You've talked about fires you've built.
Well, I'm no bushcrafter, but I can like people that are like really practiced at it, or that start it with a flint.
Mm-hmm.
I can maybe do that. Hey, listen, you give me a fire starter and a Bic lighter, and I'll get your fire started.
Well, I know I've talked with you, and I've heard a fire in the background, and you seemed really happy with the fire you built. You really think it was a good one, right?
A fire is always nice.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with satisfaction in that regard. Even God, when He made the world, He stepped back and said, "Oh, that's good. This was a good thing." We're not talking about that. There's this sense in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 6 that's communicated directly in the translation of being lifted up with pride. And that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about a self-inflation. We're talking about a trap where we come to think higher of ourselves and our ideas, etc., than we ought to. And that really is a danger. And the devil loves to convince us to be proud and to sell us on pride. In fact, we have whole classes of people today, like the LGBTQ movement, that celebrate it for an entire month.
Yep.
It's a time when they feel sort of lifted up in that regard.
Go figure. this leads me to like a sports example of it, and it's like a young player that really is talented, and they come on and they have early success. And this is back when we still had newspapers that people read, and they'd read an article about themselves and how great they were, and it's a trap that you can fall into. It puffs you up, you're proud, and then you kind of get a little over your skis because your head's too puffed up, and you play outside your ability a little bit, and then especially if it's in a movie or something, then there's an arc where they have to humble themselves a little bit. And, or they're not as much of a team player anymore because the newspaper or the news or the sports coverage says that I'm probably the best player on the team.
Right, and it ruins their ability to work together on the team. I'm reminded of what Samuel ended up having to say to Saul, King Saul, way back in ancient Israel, that, King Saul, when he was picked, he was kind of he didn't even want to be king. He's even though he
hiding in the
part.
luggage.
That's exactly right. And yet eventually he does have a great downfall because before, pride comes before a fall, where he was told by God through the prophet, God said, when you are small in your own eyes.
Saul's a really interesting study.
He is. He eventually wasn't small in his own eyes anymore. It was lifted up with pride.
It's hard to figure out how long he reigned, but you can do it. And he reigned about 40 years. And the first 20 years were not the end of the world. The last 20 were pretty bad. I would actually characterize his rule as more like organized crime.
Oh, really?
Sort of like, they were in control. He and his supporters. What's the thing that I always get wrong? The rules of being in charge. You have to, if you're going to be a leader, you have to have certain things that support you.
I don't know. What are you talking about? The key supporters?
Every ruler has to kind of play by the same rules.
Oh, right. Yeah, there's that book on the dictators, the handbooks the dictator's handbook or something. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and he does talk about how every every ruler in the world has to have certain support, has to have key supporters, has to have access to the treasure. Yeah.
So he really leaned on the tribe of Benjamin as his support. In fact, there's we're way off the reservation here, but there's a point right before he slaughters all the priests in a certain town and their families where he goes on a rant about, you guys why are you so nice to David? Are they going to give you sons of Benjamin, something like that? Are they going to give you all the finest vineyards and things like that? And he was taking care of them, and he was feeling sorry for himself because nobody tells him that David has gone and done whatever David's doing. It's really something.
Yeah, it really is. With a leader's key supporters, when you start to focus on yourself, you start to lose sight of God. And you start to look at just the physical support you have. And that's, I found the verse actually where Samuel does say that to Saul, where he says, when you were little in your own eyes, were you not the head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? Really, that's what real leadership, especially in ancient Israel, when God was actively involved in that way, what's the only key support you have to worry about is God. Right. If he had made God happy, he wouldn't have to worry about anything else.
I always wondered why Saul and David's story are so intertwined, and it's actually to make points like that. Saul feared everything but God, and David feared nobody but God. And that's one of the stories you can get out of that.
Look at you, Mr. Robinson. That is very, very nice. I want to needle point that on a pillow. When we allow Satan to inject pride into our lives, we get caught up in that snare. We become way too quick to think that our own ideas are better than others without even really thinking about them, without hearing them out. Why? Because it's our idea. I thought of it. It's the best. We start thinking our own decisions are just by default always the right ones, less open to hearing, some other decision, and that our own opinions are far more valuable than they actually are. Why? Because we have them. We tend to think that way, and eventually it does lead to a spirit of rebellion. That can be physical rebellion. Pride can lead us to rebel against our parents if we're still young. It can lead us to push against our boss, our employer, whatever the case is. Ultimately, rebel against God, because I guarantee you, God doesn't always think the way that you do. But when you are truly filled with yourself, when you're filled with pride, like the devil was, it did eventually lead to rebellion on his part as well. So Anyway, one of Satan's favorite things. The next one is lust. I feel like I should say that in a different, like lust, like in some kind of,
We'll have to go back and take that out.
Yeah, we will. Lust. Now, we heard earlier about lust of the flesh, and for Eve's case, that was actually food. That was literally food. And while we do tend to think of lust, because we're trying to keep these categories fairly broad, I'd like to look at that more broadly than just sexual lust, but rather this idea of having urges and just giving into them in an unbridled or uncontrolled way.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think a good example of that can be things like emotions like anger. I remember one time, and I like to think I keep my emotions in check relatively well, but there was one time I was really frustrated with somebody, and it was one of the few times I could really remember kind of lighting into them. This is some time ago, and it was almost like I removed the filter that keeps you from getting too angry, and I knew it. And afterwards, I did not feel better. And so, kind of giving in to an emotion that you felt strongly, actually not a good thing.
Not a great plan. This idea that we need regulators in place, and if you really boil lust down to its core, it's just kind of giving in to the drive, giving in to the urge. We all have to eat, but we don't all have to be gluttons. We don't have to eat everything in sight. The word, again, it's most often associated with sexuality, and when it comes to Satan's favorite things, sexual lust is one of his favorite things in this civilization. He is, if you read like what some elites and academics said, they'll treat sexual desire as if it is equivalent to food, as if, you have to eat and you have to have water and people have to have sex, whether it's fornication, whatever the case is. And it's really fascinating what the devil has done in our society in that regard, and our civilization just complies with that. I mean, if you don't think the spirit of lust doesn't completely fill our society, at least here in the West, I would say you haven't seen a billboard in a long time. It's a advertising, commercial. It's all designed to make us feel like we have wants that must be satisfied, and just give us a few coins and we'll make sure it gets satisfied.
Yeah. I don't ever hear this phrase used anymore, so it's a bit dated. But the old saying, "Keeping up with the Joneses," families or the parents would compare themselves to other people on the block back when the United States was still ascended and very prosperous, and Facebook kind of picked up the baton from that idea, and it was a kind of, here's my amazing life on here. Oh, Jeff, do you see how their amazing life over here? We have to make our life even more amazing, and it kind of becomes competitive in that way.
It does, and there's an element to that that's additional that we will cover, I think, with envy, in terms of bringing that up. But you're exactly right. We have a culture that's built on, how's our society built on getting us to crave more?
Yeah.
You don't have enough. You must have more of something. And, we allow the devil to program our brains in this world to just see everything through our lustful urges. It's never ending. That's the thing with lust, whether it's sexual lust, whether we are just broadening it to talk about craven physical appetites of some sort. You can never fill that hole. God teaches us to have a godly contentment. We need to learn to be content. There's nothing wrong with striving for better or improving our lot, but if there's not a spirit of contentment at the foundation of that, we'll find that we can never be filled, because satisfying outside of the boundaries that God sets, satisfying those urges does nothing but increase the urge. That is, you'll find that the same things aren't enough to satisfy in the future. You have to have more. It's like drug addiction. Eventually, the body comes accommodated to that, and it's like, well, okay, that's fine, but what new is out there for me? What more is out there for me? I know it might be a weird proverb to turn to, but it comes to my mind when it comes to this idea of just absolutely letting your stomach lead you, letting your urges lead you. And in Proverbs chapter 30, verses 15 and 16, it says here, the leech has two daughters, give and give. There are three things that are never satisfied, four never say enough. The grave, the barren womb, the earth that is not satisfied with water, and the fire never says enough. It's not like the fire ever says, thanks for more wood, but I'm kind of done. I've got enough. It's like, hey, more wood? Yeah, I'll burn that too. It just continues to grow. Yeah. And that's what satisfying lust is. You give it some, it's never going to be satisfied. Yeah. It's always going to want more.
To me, this would naturally fall under the 10th commandment, the coveting other things.
I do think of the commandment. To me, it gets more in line with envy, but I do think it is related. Okay. Yeah, I do think it is related. I probably should have grouped those two together in our notes. Let's pretend that I did that. Okay. I'm too lazy to edit it that way, so we'll just go in the order we got them. But yeah, let's definitely come back to that, because I do think the 10th commandment does come involved. In fact, if we could control lust, it'd be a lot harder to covet and envy, because we'd be more content. But to get to that one, let's go to the next one then, and that is deceit. Deceit is one of the devil's favorite things, and the Bible indicates, really, in a very real way, that he is the originator of lies and deceit. If you look at John chapter 8 and verse 44, Jesus Christ was being absolutely brutal in terms of his condemnation of the leaders of his day, saying, Abraham is our father and stuff. He's like, yeah, okay, whatever. And he moves on in verse 44, just absolutely harsh, but deserved. I mean, if Jesus Christ said it, it's because they needed to hear it. In John 8 and verse 44, speaking to them, he says, you are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. I don't know. That is quite a takedown, I think, of them. But that idea of not standing in the truth and that there's no truth in him. Mr. Armstrong, I don't know if you would say, I wouldn't say the devil doesn't use truth. Right. He can actually say many truthful things, but it's about what his core is not being truthful.
I think that's a very important point to make. In fact, the original Genesis account that talks about where we are now was the description of Satan as subtle. I mean, it's when somebody comes at you with a straightforward lie and that's not going to be very effective on you. But if it's mostly true with one key element that's false, and it gets hard to detect which element is false if you don't know all the facts of what's going on, it's the subtlety. You could even argue in some cases it's lots of truth, but just seeded with enough of a lie somewhere else that you begin to believe something that's overall broadly untrue.
The way you put that there made me think it's almost like you're not seeing what's true as there being a value in truth. Rather, true things are nothing but a tool for you. The true things are simply tools and instruments used to accomplish the deception. You're not even invested in the truth at all. You're just thinking, well, which of these truths can I use to convince this person of the lie? Or which of these truths, in fact, which of the truths should I ignore to be able to convince this person of the lie?
Or as you and I were talking about in our show prep, it can be a truth, like an accurate statement, while leaving out a critical bit of information that would really change the statement if you knew it. And so you could be deceived by something that really is actually technically accurate, but false because an important detail is left out.
Absolutely. And of course, there is a commandment. I have in my notes here. I like the commandment, and I feel stupid for saying that. It's like, you like a commandment, one of the 10 commandments. Well, what a special boy you are. But I like the way it's worded in particular, in that, sometimes we'll say, you shall not lie, and I get that. But I just like that it feels broader about that when it comes to your neighbor, that it says you shall not bear false witness. Right. I don't know. It just seems broader to me.
I struggled with that for years, believe it or not, because I liked the cleanness of the idea that the commandment was don't lie. But I over time became more and more comfortable with bear false witness because, to me, that as you said, it expands the idea of, don't misrepresent things. In your dealings with other people, don't mislead. Don't let your when we think of a witness, we kind of think of going up before a judge and getting in the stand and being a witness, but in that way, or witnessing a Christian witness kind of thing. It's just your report about what's going on in the world. Make sure it's accurate.
Yes, exactly. And that's just not, you could tell it's not a priority today anymore. There's a old skit that I saw. This is not going to be an endorsement. It was an old Saturday Night Live skit of some sort. It was a kind of fake commercial, but it was for this food, quote unquote food, was called Almost Pizza. And they're kind of making fun of, what are we doing to food, these days? And so the mom is trying to sell the wife trying to sell the husband on having a piece of almost pizza, and he's just not really sure why is it almost pizza? It's pizza, right? Well, almost, And there's a part where she's describing it, and she says something to the effect of it's practically pizza in every way, except for a few key ones. And it's like, well, what are the ones? And it's like the same thing, like these days news reporting. It's like, well, it's practically the truth in every way, except for a few key ones. And those key ones end up being the ones that make all the difference. You will, I think, remember, and I liked, because I liked back when we talked about this way back about, I think it was Jordan Peterson. I'm almost certain it's Jordan Peterson. We'll talk about how if you get caught up in lying and in using lies and mixing your truth with lies, mm-hmm. it distorts your map of reality or something like that. Does that sound right?
Yeah. Oh no, that's good. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What it was? Elaborate on that for me.
I like how he can take an idea like this that could be a little bit abstract and tries to make a corollary explanation that's a little more mundane. And so, for example, it really is like, well, you know how to get from your home to your work, but then one day there's something inconvenient about the route, and in your mind you're like, well, I could go this way, but the route that's not actually true or accurate. Mm-hmm. And then one day, if your map gets inaccurate enough, you don't ever end up at work because you have too many holes in the truth of getting to work. I don't know if I explained that very well. But, you expand that, like if you accept things in your mind that, whether you know them to be truthful or not, you get an inaccurate map of reality. And then if you have an inaccurate map of reality, well, that's like kind of what the Bible says. One day you're going to end up in the ditch.
Right.
Because you had a faulty map.
The blind leading the blind, I see that with the transgender culture in the country here and there, because it's amazing how much you kind of commit to a certain falsehood. And it's amazing how that commitment to falsehood begins to corrupt other views of the world and other views, to the point that there's things that should be screamingly obviously true, but your internal map, it's not even an element on your map. Your map says it's a mountain. When you're looking, it's a chasm, and you don't know anymore because you've completely distorted your view of reality. When we allow the devil to successfully tempt us to begin misrepresenting the truth in some way, giving people the truth, but not really, differing from the truth only in a few key ways. Otherwise, it's the truth. When we give into that temptation, we begin to distort our own connection to what is real. And honestly, clearly, because it's breaking a commandment, but we're departing from God. God is described in more than one place. I know at least one, but I think in several places, the phrase God of truth. He's a God of truth. Truthfulness and what is real and what is right is valuable to God. It's a reflection of who He is, truthfulness. And so a willingness to depart from truthfulness is a willingness to depart from the mindset, heart, and character of God, whether it's in small ways or large ones.
Yep. I have an example I'm not sure if I should use, because as soon as we started talking about this, it reminded me of it, and how the devil is subtle in his deception, and it's not always obvious. And in this modern world where we are right now, there's more and more ideologues in media. And I thought a good example with this, because I was actually I remember when I first heard this quote, and then I went and found it again. how not everybody thinks that the truth is important. And so the head of NPR, which is public radio in the United, if you're not from the United States, wouldn't be quite right to say it's like the BBC, but it's sort of like a kind of a state-run news.
It's funded
or
publicly,
funded by,
right? Yeah, and it does definitely get some tax subsidies. And I think I read even some as a European country their own kind of version of NPR. So it's probably pretty popular as a model.
And the reason I want to quote this example, definitely not for political reasons, and some could take this politically, but it's because it helped me understand a little more where people are coming from, which is there is an idea out there that the social justice outcome is more important than the truth. And there are people that believe that, and
right.
They argue for it. And so here's what she says. Because this was a congressional testimony when Doge was still operating, and they probably are still
DOGE, the trying to eliminate government waste, right?
Yeah. She said, perhaps for our most tricky disagreements, seeking the truth and seeking to convince others of the truth might not be the right place to start. In fact, our reverence for the truth might be a distraction that's getting in the way of finding common ground and getting things done.
I think I remember seeing a video clip of that and thought, yeah, it really came across. I don't know if she intended it that way, but it absolutely came across as, well, truth really isn't all that important.
Yeah.
Maybe there might be things that are more. Maybe we need to set truth aside.
Yes.
And folks, but never the path to good things.
No.
Just simply is not.
That to me, that's an example of you want something to be a certain way, and so you're building an inaccurate map of reality. And
right.
So starting off with, an accurate map, a truthful map is not that important. What's important is this result we want to get to.
Yeah, and then if you think about it, what if you achieve that result? It's like, oh, look, now we have so much harmony, but that harmony is built on top of a lie.
Yes.
And reality eventually, the check eventually comes due, right? Eventually reality shows up again, and if whatever you've established isn't built on actual truth, then it's going to crumble before reality, because reality doesn't crumble before anything. So don't fall for that trap. The devil wants you to. Do not do it. Be devoted to what is true. Okay, we have a couple of others. The next one, actually, Mr. Robinson has touched on real well, and that is envy. And I think it's like the other in terms of lust, but there's another element to it there. I think lust of the eyes can kind of fit in this category there, but I have envy here as, and this is my definition. Look up the dictionary of Wallace Smith, and this is what he said. But envy is the constant hunger for what others have that you do not.
Yep.
And it can become a consuming fire in your life. Mr. Robinson talked about the trying to keep up with the used to be a more common phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. I don't know if that's, back then the idea was you live in a suburb, you're pulling your car to your driveway, and you look at your neighbor and, he's got a slightly nicer car. He's got that Tesla.
He's got a spoiler on the back of his car. Why do we have a spoiler?
That's right. And you're outside grilling, and then you look over and the Johnsons, he's got that grill looks great. It's so much better than mine. And you start to get caught up in this kind of, but James pulls no punches. James, the author of the book of James, go figure. In James 3:16, he says, where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. It's like, that's a lot packed into that. And yet, our world is, at least here in the West, it is very much devoted. It's built on envy. How much influencers essentially build a culture of envy. Here's what I have. Don't you wish you could have what I have? Look, here's the makeup I have. Here's the vacations I'm going on. Commercials are meant to do, why do they show so many nice people doing great things? So you can think like, man, why do they got that and I don't have that? Very much we have a civilization in terms of our financial system that is sort of built on envy, making sure that we're not content when we see our friend, our neighbor, our brother, our sister having something that we want to have instead.
Well, when capitalism really got going in the West, truly, and it seemed like such a great thing because it really drove, productivity, and instead of having not having everything we wanted, all of a sudden we had an abundant lifestyle in the West in particular. But you and I were talking about this just a couple of days ago. It feels like also one of our final lessons. We put a lot of stock in democracy and how great that is, and capitalism, and then it drives the world economy and everything. But now we're seeing the downsides of both, especially capitalism, as the greediness takes over, and we live in kind of a consumption lifestyles that's really very, very wasteful. So though it has some good parts to it, that overall it results in a negative. And I would argue it has a negative result in the end. At least unchecked capitalism. I would argue when you analyze how, kind of like we talked about this, in fact, in one of our podcasts, how's God's economy in the millennium going to work? And it's not just eliminating everything and having one certain type. It's kind of a bit of a mix of you need a little bit of capitalism in your economy. But actually, before I say that, would you agree with that?
I would.
Okay.
I think I have an article in the Living Church News about capitalism and socialism, and how God's system will be neither, right? It's so easy to root for just one or the other. But you do look at elements of what God will have. There's every reason to believe we're going to have artisans that have the ability to make things, and we're going to look at those things. Oh, that'd be really nice. I'd like that. I like the wheel on that wagon. I like this. But that doesn't have to be a culture that's built on envy, on constantly saying, man, I'm tired of seeing everybody else with this, and I don't have one. I'm just as good as them. I ought to have something like that. There's a difference between the ability to make and sell goods and privately own things, and a spirit that gets just worked up because they see somebody else in possession of something that we don't have. Actually, what is it, John? Oh, the Bible says that, as like in the body of Christ, when we see someone else having something good, we should rejoice with them.
Yes.
We should be happy that they have that.
Okay, I have a hot take on this.
All right, hot take, go.
Okay, so when we read descriptions of the millennium, Christ's 1,000-year reign, and humanity more or less is now kind of on board with things. I only say that because there's still the occasional rebellion.
Yeah, sure. He's working with them. He's bringing them along actively, right?
And so when it's described in terms of great abundance, and you even can go and look at some of the details of Solomon's reign. The one time Israel as a nation actually reflected the model that God wanted them to have. And the Queen of Sheba came up to see, hey, if everything I've heard about what's going on in Israel is true. And then you hear things like silver was counted as practically worth it because gold was so abundant, that kind of thing. But then also I think about that the plowman shall overtake the reaper, that the abundance of the crop yields. And I kind of wonder if it's going to be difficult to be envious when everybody is there's so much abundance. It's like, how are you going to compete?
Right. It is interesting because I have thought about that, because the devil will be removed for 1,000 years. But we frequently say, used to say more often than we do, than we do now perhaps, but it's still true that generally in this life we struggle against the three S's: Satan, self, and society. And in the 1,000-year reign, Satan will be taken care of for that 1,000 years. He'll be gone. Society will be improved, over time. As the world yields to Jesus Christ and His reign, society will be wonderful. But we'll still have the self. And the idea that it's impossible for us to sin without the devil, that's actually just not true. Right. Remember, the devil the devil deceived Eve. But Adam was not deceived. Yes. Adam knew exactly what he was doing and chose to do it anyway. And so in this particular case, I think envy is still a possibility, but it's really interesting because it will not be necessarily based on need. It's not like oh, my family's hungry and Bob's not. Why don't I have what Bob has? No, it really might be the idea that, well, you see Bob has a nicer thing. Do you really need the nicer thing? Does your whole family like the thing that you already have? Do you only start wanting it because Bob has it and you don't? I think there's still that potential for that, but it'll be nice because we'll be in a world that at least is focused on that. There will be a certain clarity in the millennium that we don't have in this day and age. And when you are caught up in envy, it's just, you begin potentially, and this will lead into the last thing we'll cover today, but you really move into a place where you begin to resent your brother for the thing he has. It's like especially if it's something you can't actually get yourself, and yet you're so envious that he has that, it starts to turn into not even so much a desire for the thing, but a resentment for your brother.
Yes.
And your heart towards your brother begins to grow cold. And then if his thing breaks, you're glad. You're
Right.
glad. You're glad to have. Why? It didn't give you that thing. It just meant that suddenly he doesn't have it anymore.
Well, that's such a fundamental idea that was one of Cain's main problems, was that he wasn't doing as well as his brother. His brother was doing great and bringing offerings to God that he was happy with, and while his attitude seemed to prevent him from bringing a good offering for it, and he became more and more resentful towards his brother because in that sense he didn't have what his brother had.
And it really is interesting because Cain had the opportunity to have just as much. Fundamentally, what is it that Cain needed most is a relationship with his Creator. And that's what envy can do, is crowd out our sense of what really are the most important things. So Bob has a nicer car. But you know what? When it comes to the most important things in life, which is the promise of eternal life, forgiveness through the blood of Jesus Christ, the opportunity to be in the family of God, we have every bit as much access as our neighbor does. If we start really seeing the things he has that we don't have, and getting caught up in that feeling of ugliness about that, it starts to crowd out our priorities in terms of what really is most important. Now, that said, it could be the same thing even with spiritual things, I suppose. We see Bob has a relationship with God and we don't. But hopefully what we're seeing really is fruit in his life, that we don't just want the fruit. We want to know, what is the source of that, right? What do I plug into? But this idea of our heart turning away from our brother, it does lead to the last thing that I thought we'd talk about today, and that is bitterness. Oh, how the devil seems to love bitterness. I don't say that because I've read some book he wrote says, How Much I Love Bitterness by Satan the Devil. But you definitely say, for he uses it so frequently and so powerfully, it's hard to imagine he doesn't.
It's hard to pick out which one of these attitudes is the most toxic because, to me, pride is sort of a gateway into lots of toxic behavior. But when you become deeply, deeply resentful and bitter about something, it's very, very difficult to ever recover from that. And then it makes you have a really dark view of the entire world, and you're just kind of like a dark shadow on everything. Like when the bitterness gets really extreme.
Oh yeah, I like the phrase "root of bitterness" because I think it's very much kind of related to that. I think the classic verse in that regard, probably some might disagree, but Hebrews chapter 12, verses 14 and 15, where Paul, it's interesting that he's focusing on people at the beginning of this. He says in Hebrews 12, verse 14, pursue peace with all people. In other words, don't let someone escape your gaze and think, I don't have to worry about peace with that person. No, pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Looking carefully, verse 15, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Bitterness can defile us. And I do like that phrase, a root of bitterness, because I don't know about your lawn. You probably have a spectacular lawn, Mr. Robinson, that has no weeds in it whatsoever.
Well, it could be worse.
That's all right. I'll take that.
We quit using a lawn service, and they would come in and spray it in the spring to kind of keep the weeds down. My main problem is I grow grass fine. It's just as the summer wears on, I get more and more not grass in it, and
yeah, we have our homeowners association requires a certain kind of grass, and it just hates summer. It's just a summer hating grass, and so consequently, there's always opportunities for weeds. And yeah, I do. I try to be old school. I remember the olden days going out with my grandfather and going out and plucking them weeds. So yeah, we'll pluck the weeds, and I just try to get my fingers as deep as I can to try to get as much of that root, because, man, you leave a bit of root, it just comes right back.
Seems to be one of the problems with weeds is that if you don't get the root, it's just inevitable.
Exactly. And that's why I really appreciate the use of the phrase root of bitterness, because, you can attend to some of the results. It's like if you're really bitter, you can kind of paper over it. You can do these things. But, man, if that root is still there, it is still going to come out.
Well, plus I also like the literal imagery of it, that it's something under the ground. You can't just see it, like, but it's there deep inside, and it's growing.
Yeah, when a person does have that root of bitterness, it's not like it shows on us all the time, right? But that is how it starts to happen. It starts to, because it's inside of us. We're constantly thinking about it. So how does it come up? It's an ugly thing in general. The word bitter, we also speak of with flavors, right? I know there's some nice bitter flavors. I'm not trying to say everything that's bitter is literally something called bitters. That's right. It's called bitters here and there. There's other things. But overall, we don't tend to use bitter in a positive way. When you're not expecting something bitter, you taste like, oh, that was bitter. There's a reason that feeling and that taste and this share a word in that regard. And how does it often start? Often it starts with a hurt or an offense or a disappointment. And I'm not even trying to say a wrong hurt. Like some people definitely, they perceive an offense and it's not real, right? But I mean, we're not talking about perceived or real. Just assume it's real.
That you saying it like that reminded me of why the concept in Matthew 18 is so key that you go to your brother, because a lot of offenses are unintentional. Like you don't know you've offended somebody,
right?
Or the other person has misinterpreted your actions or your statements in some way.
You thought something was said and assumed they're in it, and no, I would never. I didn't say that.
I would say a lot of, like maybe even half of misunderstandings are resolved like that it really was a misunderstanding.
Yeah, but you've got to be willing to have that uncomfortable moment where you go and talk about tough. It. And yet, what do you face with if you don't? Again, it often begins with a hurt, with an offense, with a disappointment. Those things in life are inevitable. You will not live in this life and not be hurt, not be offended, or not be disappointed. The question is, just as Mr. Robinson brought out, what do we do with those things? Because if we do the wrong things, we risk developing bitterness. I'm in true confessions. I've done this, where I've been offended by something. Someone has done something wrong, whether it was true or whether I've perceived it as irrelevant. And then I feed it. I play it over in my mind over and over. A friend of mine a long time ago in a really good sermonette talked about, this is back when VHS was a valid medium for watching things on your television, because you could record your own movie or you could record something on TV and then play it later. And I'm sure there's an analogy, I just said with VHS. But he says it's like having a cassette tape, videotape of that offense. And you go into bitterness as you just keep popping it in the player and watching it over and over. And so I play the tape in the notes. I mean, like in football, they do that, right? You're trying to figure out what the other team is doing. You're watching tapes of their games over and over. But imagine instead you're watching a wrong that was done to you, and you refuse to change the channel. You just keep playing it over and over and over.
Well, I think one of the really key ways to combat this is what Paul says right up front: pursue peace with all people. And that is such a simple phrase. And a younger me would read that, and it's always the way it goes in my head. It's like, I mean, I get it. Pursue peace with all people. Hello, that's obvious. But I'll give a couple examples. You talked about the grass and the HOA. So for those of you who may not be familiar with it, a lot of the neighbor, just a defined area that's a neighborhood, will have a homeowners association that makes up rules or monitors things. Okay.
Meant to try to keep the value of the homes the same, so someone can't put all their furniture out on the lawn or all their old refrigerators, because you have a kind of you got to support the neighborhood's value overall, right?
And I think it had a good intention when it started, which was to kind of like you said, keep some house from turning into a hoarder house, spilling out.
Right.
Okay. And I like that it's an active word. Pursue. Peace doesn't just like fall on you or just happen by accident in general. Like you have to, in terms of dealings with other people, with your neighbors, you have to pursue it. So I have two examples of this. One, this is my more newer realization. But when you move into a new neighborhood, I do extra work to make sure that the house is in good working order and the lawn is good, because you don't want to attract that attention. Like the worst thing you could do is come in and not mow your yard for 3 months, and then all of a sudden everybody in the neighborhood is aware of you, and then they kind of keep an eye on you. Or so like I have a neighbor, the next door neighbor, who put in a little extension to their house and put on this big floodlight on the outside, and he left it on all the time. So at night,
Really?
like it would shine into my yard, and it really bothered me. And I thought about, well, what could I do? Could I covertly say something to the HOA or something? And I decided that peace with my neighbor was far more important than that light shining into my backyard. And I never said anything. Now, it took a few years, but it doesn't come on at night in the same way that it used to. I never understood why he couldn't do it as a motion detector light, so if somebody was in his backyard, the light came on, but it just was on around the clock. Peace with my neighbor was far more important than getting into, like, is there anything worse than having your next door neighbor being hostile to you because you're the guy that reported his spotlight, shining into your backyard? Even if you have a good case for it, you risk bitterness. But I'd say the one that was even a greater lesson that I learned much earlier in my life was the idea of road rage. So again, for those who might not know it, the road rage is the phrase we use where you're lots of cars are driving in the same road and traffic's congested in the city, and people start doing selfish things and they cut in on you and you get upset, and then people are honking. The next thing you know, like, I'm not exaggerating, somebody's gotten out of the car with a bat or a gun or something.
You have abandoned all self-restraint because you're so angry.
And back then I was driving very aggressively. And when I say aggressively, I don't mean like offensively. It's just that I was a good driver and I was tired of all the not good drivers. And so I'd whip around. Well, one day some guy nearly ran me off the road in a situation like that. And I thought, you know what? Because it's been kind of building in my mind a little bit. I'm going to have peace with the other drivers around me so I don't get caught up in a road rage incident where somebody's got a gun in my face.
Wow.
So I pursue peace when I drive I just allow any offense pretty much to go past me, whether it could bother me, but I'm not going to do anything about it.
Right. Wow.
And I give people extra room and I stay clear of things. I pursue peace on the road to avoid road rage incidents.
It's funny you say that, because this idea, I was thinking about that. I didn't actually add to the notes, but this idea that when you really you are dangerously getting close to getting bitter about something, because you just keep thinking about it over and over and over. I give, for example, you talk about road rage. There's times when I've just been, cut off real rudely, and you're almost like, well, he had to know I was here. There's no way he could know. We don't know. And then next thing you know, he's someplace else in the traffic. And even if I didn't pursue him like a weirdo, I'm going to let that guy know. Still, I'm thinking about it. And I keep thinking about it. It's like, man, you know what? How did that do something? I should have scooted out. I should have kept him. And you keep thinking it over and over. And then I realized that guy's not even thinking about me at all anymore, right? I mean, he's on the road. He's maybe he's late for work and is innocent, or maybe who knows? Maybe he is a jerk. Maybe he purposely did that and didn't care. But the point is, he's not thinking of me at all. And yet, without even charging him rent, he is living in my mind, right? He is taking up this space, and that was part of what cued me. It's like, why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. I think I have more profitable thoughts I can think. And I like how you cued in on that verse that Paul says, pursue peace, because pursue really does indicate an activity. I mean, like a lion after a gazelle, it is something that does take effort on our part. It doesn't come easily, peace with people, but pursue it, actually invest in it. And if that's the path to not growing bitter, it's worth it. People often say about forgiveness that, at least humanly, forgiveness does way more for us as the forgiver than it does for the person we're forgiving. There's a release. There's just ability to just move on, right? And actually kind of, focus on other things. Because if we can't forgive, there's a phrase. I'll just grab the phrase. The context in Acts chapter 8 is Peter talking to Simon, the sorcerer, who has wanted to pay money for the power to give the Holy Spirit like God's ministry can. And as he's just really calling him out, talking, Acts chapter 8, verse 22, repent therefore of your wickedness and pray God if perhaps the thought of your heart may be forgiven you. And he says in verse 23, for I see that you are poisoned by bitterness and bound by iniquity. And it's so important because bitterness really is like a poison. If you have that in you, if you really are a person who is bitter inside about something, just like kind of leaven in the dough, it just spreads and it begins to poison your thinking in so many different ways. And it does what it says in Hebrews chapter 12. It defiles us. It really can defile us. And I don't know about you, Mr. Robinson, but I mean, I can think of individuals who ended up leaving the fellowship of the faith. And if I really try to ask myself why, it's not true in every case, but in some of those cases, it's really because something made them, they
Yep.
allowed something to make them bitter.
I wish I could say that wasn't true, but it 100% is. And even like when we use the word bitterness, like it doesn't always have to be this like your countenance is fallen and you have
Right.
look
It's
like a
often
monster,
inside,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And I can think of several people that left where you would have never guessed, and you find out that some earlier thing had happened. Maybe they felt like a minister was unfair or another member had offended them. But when you get to the core of what's going on is some level of being bitter about something that happened in the past. Like, people are complicated. There's multiple reasons
Right.
they may leave the church, but underpinning a lot of them is some level of bitterness.
All those things said, this atonement, I appreciate Mr. Robinson pointing out that there is a lot to celebrate about the Day of Atonement. It's not just about getting rid of the devil and that, but that said, it is an element of what we do cover at this time. And this Day of Atonement coming up is a time to be reminded the devil is going to be removed from this world. Humanity will still be tempted in these directions, but it's not going to be a matter of society. It's not going to be about the devil just constantly, sending spiritual waves, if you will, and kind of being the architect of the world underneath. So there'll be those temptations, but not in the same way that it is in this life, where honestly we have to be swimming against the tide of that which is around us. There can be no millennial world if pride and lust and deceit and envy and bitterness are simply encouraged by the God of this world, the ruler of this world, in every corner of the world. He has to be removed, and these things will be removed with him. And those who will be reigning beside Jesus Christ are going to be those who have wrestled against these things in this life, and with Jesus Christ's help, have prevailed over those things. So don't make the devil's favorite things your favorite things. Be on the lookout, avoid them at all cost, and set your mind on things above.